Hey guys, so I am coming at you with a Rafaam Warlock. So unfortunately, Rafaam is terrible. You will never actually win by playing the 10 mana Rafaam, so just give up on that now, even against Control Priest. But my goal was to try to make a Rafaam deck that was like at least playable. And I climbed a legend with it. I'm currently at like around 1,000 legend. So, this deck is definitely like playable for sure. And really what we're doing is we're just maximizing the scam potential of the possessed Animancer into Ultra Gigasaur, which is a really funny combo. Yeah, most decks cannot deal with a 1428 on turn 5. And Warlock got a lot of great tools this expansion to pop eggs. So you have cards like your Herald package, right? Where your Herald card, if you Herald Cho'Gall, it summons soldiers that destroy the minion to the right of them to gain +2/+2. So it's great for popping eggs and popping death rattles, including the possessed Animancer. And this location, Shrine of Twilight, you could play that on turn 4 and wait to click the button, and then on turn 5 you play your possessed Animancer, then pop it on the same turn. You have a 1428 that pops out ready to attack on turn 6. So these are really powerful abilities. You also have some great things that combo with that from the new set, like, we have a new egg effect, Twilight Egg. We have Cursed Chains, where you can steal an opponent's minion and then sacrifice it to yourself. This is really great, especially against opponents who are running egg decks. You can steal their egg. We also have the Sheltered Survivor, which makes me feel a lot better about my life when I play this deck, because if you get an Ultra Gigasaur in your hand, you could shuffle it back in, which makes it more possible to run this deck and only just run two Ultra Gigasaurs and no other beasts. Um, and then, yeah, otherwise, you have some other cards I think have some interesting synergies with the Rafaam package. Like you have Ocular Occultist, which is a 3 mana 3/6 taunt. It's great stats, but you have to choose a card in your hand to discard. So, there are some cards that have discard synergy, or yeah, this one, like, cards where if you discard it, something good happens. But also, it turns out that because Rafaam is such a garbage card, like if you get the 10 mana Rafaam in your hand, you could just discard it because you're never going to play that. You're never going to actually win using Rafaam. But, Rafaam does actually have some good cards built within the Rafaam package, like, for example, like Calamitous Rafaam, the 6 mana deal 6 is crazy. The Mind Flayer Rafaam is insane. War Chief Rafaam's great against burn. You gain 10 health, right? There's a lot of really powerful Rafaam cards, but there are also some very useless ones, and so you can just like discard the useless ones, which is really nice, or shuffle them back into your deck. So this list, I used it to climb the legend. I don't think it's quite optimal, and I actually have a second version of this list where I dropped some things, like I dropped Gen, I dropped Gemstone Hoarder. I made some changes to the list, but yeah, ultimately, and here's my second list. But ultimately, yeah, this deck is definitely super playable. I'll post both deck codes, the original deck list and the refined one. Um, but yeah, if you want to try out something new this expansion, you want to try out Warlock, try to maybe who knows, maybe you'll actually win with the Rafaam package, where I failed. Go for it. But yeah, I have some games to show you. And then like in my last video, I'm just gonna be yapping about a topic that I find interesting to me. So it's gonna be a little bit of a podcast situation. So yeah, I hope you enjoy and see you later.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening with the war in Iran and basically how that's messing up the entire global economy and how that's going to have effects for everybody in every walk of life. Um, and so, this is not going to be super comprehensive, but I'll just try to give a little bit of backstory and history on sort of what's been happening, right? And so in February, the U.S. and Israel launched some airstrikes, and they were ostensibly to target, Iran's nuclear facilities and their leadership. But these airstrikes also ended up just hitting civilian targets as well, and there was a lot of chaos on the ground. Now, it is confirmed that the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, or I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, um, that he was killed in these strikes, and a lot of other sort of main leaders of the Iranian theocratic regime were killed. Um, but this is leading to a lot of like power fragmentation, and it's kind of unclear at this point like who is really pulling the strings now. And the situation is kind of like fluidly evolving. Along with the really terrible like civilian death toll, which is definitely over 1,000, might be in multiple thousands for innocent people in Iran. There's also a huge economic issue, which is that the Strait of Hormuz is blocked, right? And so, basically, what the strait is for those who are unfamiliar, it is a tiny little strip of water that all the major Gulf states who export oil. So I'm just gonna pull up a map for myself really quickly, and I encourage you, feel free to do so as well. But when you look at the Strait of Hormuz and all of the states that are connected to it, you have Saudi Arabia, you have Qatar, you have the UAE, you have Kuwait, you have Iraq, right? And of course Iran. And all of these countries, to pass oil tankers through the Persian Gulf and into the Arabian Sea, you have to pass through this narrow little strip of water called the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran has direct control over that strait, right? The strait is right beside their territory, and they can choose to, if they want to, stop the flow of any tankers through the area through the use of landmines and through the use of anti-ship weapons, right? It doesn't have to be that expensive either. You can just use drones and a lot of like conventional weaponry to disrupt tankers flowing through that area. And that is exactly what Iran is doing in response to these attacks, right? They have decided, okay, well, if we're going to get bombed and if our leadership is going to get killed by the US and Israel joint operations, we're going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. And so the consequence of that is that, it's not that all oil in the world is exported out through the Strait of Hormuz, but a very significant percentage of it is. And there are other countries who produce oil, including the United States of America. But when you cut off that much oil production to the world, and Iran, if Iran's going to say, hey, if you guys are attacking us, then we're going to like cut off all of our own noses, right? Despite everybody. Like, so we're just going to shut down oil traffic through the Strait of Hormuz until we have concessions, right, from the United States. Because as that happens, then oil prices go up, right? Everybody starts feeling economic pain. And that is a very powerful sort of tactic, right, in order to force a more powerful country, the United States in this case, to to some sort of basically put them in a very bad situation. And so let's talk a little bit about history. So how we got here in there's obviously a huge long list of different historical events and timelines and stuff that between the US and Iran. But if you want to start like semi-recently, like in 2015, the JCPOA, or colloquially known as the Iran nuclear deal, negotiated by Barack Obama's administration, was basically the idea that hey, Iran, we don't want you to get nuclear weapons, right? We think that Iran with a nuke is incredibly dangerous for the world. So we're gonna put a bunch of sanctions on you, right? Economic pressure, and really make life difficult for the Iranians. And then eventually we're going to bring you to the negotiating table and say, okay, we'll lift these sanctions in exchange for you making a bunch of concessions on how you're never going to build a nuclear weapon, right? And we have, inspections and like all sorts of like stuff that we will set up to make sure that you are not able to ever build a nuclear weapon in secret, right? And so that was the Obama era strategy for how to engage this problem of Iran getting a nuke through diplomacy, right? And it relied on having a robust system of allies because in order for you to leverage sanctions on a country, um, basically like saying like, yeah, this country is not allowed to, trade their X, Y, and Z resources, out into the world. You have to have the world on your side, right? And so Iran, they will turn to countries like Russia and they'll turn to, countries who are not aligned with the United States, but we were aligned with a lot of countries in the world. And so these sanctions were pretty powerful. Now, of course, Trump, he came in and in 2016, and because he basically just hates anything that Obama did, for no reason, right? He's just big mad. He withdrew the United States from the Iran nuclear deal. And then he said, he's going to shift it towards like sort of a maximum pressure approach, which, doesn't really make a lot of sense because we basically got all the concessions that we wanted out of the Iran nuclear deal, but whatever, right? So then now we're in a situation where we are back on an antagonistic sort of stance, and Iran is like, okay, well, if you tore up the JCPOA, then we're just going to start having a secret nuclear program start going again, right? And the United States approach and Israel's approach was like, okay, well, we're just gonna like bomb this and like bomb these sites and assassinate nuclear researchers, right? Instead of just like coming up with like a diplomatic solution. And so fast forward to 2026, there in the interim, there are periods where the United States like struck Iran, and people were worried like, oh, like are we going to get into World War III? But it was always like cooler heads generally like prevailed in those situations. But the recent event, what happened was that Oman was like trying to mediate a new deal with Iran, and the U.S. was like, in those, was trying to come up with a solution to stop a nuclear weapons program from being built. And then it seems like Israel and the U.S. It's unclear like exactly what happened or who struck, if it was Israel or the United States. Like people believe it was Israel who kind of went ahead and did a preemptive strike. But yeah, basically, the airstrikes happened on Iran, and then the any sort of diplomacy just like was completely like torn up, and now we are in this predicament. So, one of the things to talk about is like, okay, what's happening in Iran, right? So historically, the Iranian leadership has been pretty repressive, and a lot of folks who are just like everyday people just trying to like get by and survive, they have been really fed up with the government in Iran because of like the sanctions and stuff I was talking about earlier, which is creating like a lot of economic pressure on the country and making goods like very expensive in the country. So a lot of people were like not fans of the government, and there are especially like a huge contingent of young people, like maybe like say like 20% of the country, who are like these like folks who are really fed up with the government, and they engage in protests, right, and riots and stuff to basically like show the government, hey, we're like really dissatisfied with what's going on here. And the Iranian regime brutally suppressed those protests, right? Killed many, many, many people. And so there is not a lot of love for the Iranian government in Iran, especially amongst the younger generation. And I think there was a thought in the United States military command that like, hey, if we just go in and kill the leadership, then the young people in Iran are just going to like do their own revolution, right? Just like there's like a revolution like Nepal and like, you know, all these other countries with like, you know, Gen Z revolutions. And we're just all we have to do as the United States is just like, let's just like, you know, kill the supreme leader and like do some stuff, and then like the country will just magically like there'll be a revolution, and then everything will be fine, and then now we'll have like a pro America, or you know, like a president who's like less antagonistic to America than the supreme leader was, because you know the supreme leadership and the, you know, Iranian theocratic state, their whole MO was like death to America, right? They really did not like America. But this is like a big miscalculation, because with all these airstrikes that are happening, a lot of civilian targets are being hit in Iran. And even though, you know, there are a lot of Iranians who are like really happy that, you know, the supreme leader was killed, you know, they're not happy that their country is being bombed. And so instead of this being an opportunity for relations between the younger folks in Iran and the US to get better, we're creating a whole new generation of people who are like, yeah, fuck the US, right? And that's just like really bad statesmanship, along with the terrible moral, human cost of like killing civilians. And so, you know, the forces in Iran who are trying to like consolidate power, they're all like very revolutionary or very reactionary types, right? And they're kind of winning because they can point to these strikes and say, hey, look, like we were right, death to America, you know, like these guys suck. They're like bombing like girls' schools and stuff like that, right? Like clearly, like we were right all along, and that you all have to, you know, support us when it comes to like taking power in Iran. And the more moderate types are kind of being driven out, right? Because they, you know, they're looking like they're a bunch of pansies now, and there's like a whole rally around the flag effect happening in Iran. And in response to the strikes, in addition to Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz, they're also striking all sorts of Gulf states in the area, right? So there's like an LNG facility in Qatar, or there's like the Imbue refinery, or I forgot exactly what the name is, in like Saudi Arabia, but you know, Iran's like hitting these places with missiles, right? The UAE is being faced with drone attacks, right? Like these are relatively cheap ways to inflict lots and lots of economic damage. And these Gulf states are, you know, they're allied with the United States due to economic interests. And they, Iran figures, hey, if we bomb these Gulf states and really mess up their economic prospects, then they're going to put pressure on the United States to get them to like stop attacking us, right? So Iran's like whole campaign is one built around like, how can we inflict as much pain, economic pain, on the US and the US allies to get the US to like make, you know, to stop doing what they're doing, and potentially, you know, not just necessarily like a purely strategic concern here, but like Iran also, there's like, I assume lots of elements of their leadership who are like, hey, you know what, fuck this, like even if at a certain point the US wants to negotiate, like we're just going to keep blocking the Strait of Hormuz, and we're going to keep bombing these like Gulf state targets, because like fuck them, right? Like we are angry and we're pissed off, and we are going to just cut off all of our noses to spite everyone's face, right? And so that's the problem when you get into these sorts of wars, is you're not dealing with people who are 100% purely like emotionless robot rational actors, right? You're dealing with human beings who get pissed and who will hold grudges and who will do things that, you know, they'll like say, no, we're just gonna dig in and just keep making this situation, you know, terrible. And all this was precipitated, of course, by Israel and the United States doing that preemptive joint strike in the first place, right? Like we were the aggressors in this situation. And so if you kind of think about the economic impacts of like what's going to happen, it's not good, right? Because crude oil, which is, you know, the thing that we're all talking about here, right? Like oil being exported out of the Gulf states through the Strait of Hormuz, that's surged in price. And so even if you are living in a country where you're not getting most of your oil from the Gulf states, you know, which is not necessarily, that's like not the situation that we're in, right? Like the United States, we don't really get all of our oil from the Gulf states necessarily. Like we have our own, like we produce a lot of our own oil and like stuff like that. But the problem is that, you know, if you have if a country's like, you know, in Southeast Asia where they are getting a lot of their oil from the Gulf states, if they can't get their oil from the Gulf states, they have to buy their oil elsewhere, and that means the price of oil is going up everywhere because there's more demand. And so before a barrel of oil, maybe, you know, ideally you want it to be around like, I don't know, $60 or less, right? If it's a little higher than that, it starts to get better for the oil companies, like a little bit like not as good for the consumers, but it's still like totally fine in terms of like being able to run a modern economy. But now the price is shooting up to like 100, 110, $120 a barrel, right? And it could get higher and higher, right? Because right now a lot of countries are in the short term just releasing their strategic reserves of oil, because a lot of countries just stash lots of barrels of oil for like bad situations like this. But eventually you run out of those strategic reserves, and then, you know, now the price of oil is going to jump really high because everybody needs oil and there's like less places to get oil. And one of the issues that oil and these like fossil fuels, like they're all necessary to produce not just like fuel, like, you know, gas and diesel for like cars and boats and machines and all that, but you also need it to make plastics, right? Like polyethylene. So if you're talking about like medical supplies, packaging, resins, right? Any of that sort of stuff, if it's using plastic, that is going to jump in price massively. You know, if you're thinking about the global fertilizer trade and you need fertilizer to grow food, like a third of that is going to be impacted. Farmers are not going to be able to, because the farmers don't run on huge margins, right? And so they're going to have trouble being able to like plant new crops without having to like get massive bailouts from the government. And so then that's the government, you know, has to spend more money to help fix that situation, in addition to dumping a bunch of money on the military conflict, right? And so this is going to turn into a gigantic economic quagmire, right? Because oil is the foundation of a lot of stuff in the modern economy. Now, it's funny because like this is going to have massive bad economic effects at the pump, right? It's going to have bad economic effects and political ramifications for just everyday people in the United States. And that's, you know, I'll focus on that because I, you know, live in the United States. I love this country. I want things to be better here, and I want people to be able to live affordable lives and be able to not have to like give up, you know, like food in order to pay for, you know, medical supplies or whatever. You know, it's like we want to be able to live affordable lives, and this situation is going to be jeopardizing all of that. And in addition, it's also jeopardizing the United States like foreign allyships, right? And messing up our strategic interests. Because like if anybody's winning from this war, it's actually Russia, because Russia is a big oil exporter, and now that the Strait of Hormuz is blocked, Russia's like, hey everybody, we have a bunch of oil, like buy it from us. And the United States, I think, recently lifted their sanctions on Russia, and now we're buying Russian oil. I think, you know, I might be getting that wrong, but like, yeah, like now everybody's like buying Russian oil, and before we had sanctioned them and told everybody like, hey, you can't like buy this oil because of, you know, Russia invading Ukraine. But now it's like we've just lifted those sanctions, so I guess it's like we're just like, yeah, Russia, here you go, like here's you can make a bunch of money now again from all this oil. And like China also stocked up on a bunch of oil reserves and in anticipation of a conflict like this. So, you know, I'm not saying that China's like making it out really well or anything, but they were more prepared to deal with this conflict than the United States and our leadership, who just made really massive blunders, like getting us into a situation. There's really little justification for what's happening right now. There's no strategic plan, and you know, we have a situation where our, you know, our quote unquote like foreign adversaries, you know, even though I personally, like, I don't have anything against the people, the everyday average people of Russia or China or anything like that, right? But it's like, if you're talking about a US strategic perspective and you're like a statesman and you're looking across the aisle at like China and Russia, you know, if the US's goal is to like, strategically succeed against those countries, this war has done nothing but fail, right? And worsened our position on the global stage. And so it's just really disappointing. Obviously, there's 10 billion things that I disagree with when it comes to the current administration, how they handle all sorts of things. But I think this is above everything else, like a truly incomprehensibly stupid and unjustifiable decision from like a strategic perspective. It's one of those things where you just wonder, you're just like, how did we get to this place where we are living in like an idiocracy sort of moment, right? And so yeah, I don't know when this conflict is going to end. Nobody does. So yeah. Anyways, yeah, that's my little spiel. And I'll see you guys later.